Welcome. You're listening to The Hill by Thieves Theater. I'm Gabrielle.
And I'm Nick, and we're Thieves.
Well, not exactly Thieves, but beginning in 1981, we called ourselves Thieves Theater, but we didn't just do theater. We did conceptual guerrilla art projects, or what we called paratheatrical work. Our goal was to disrupt and alter the social and political status quo.
Which means we really just like putting sticks in anthills and watching the ants scurry and adjust to their new reality, their new status quo.
So we're coming towards the end of this story. A few more episodes and the events of the tipi in the shantytown will have been told. This episode will end with the death of Mr. Lee. And then there'll be a few more episodes to deal with the aftermath.
It's not the events, the facts that's difficult to narrate. It's trying to make sense of it all, trying to analyze what it is we did, our actions and non-actions, which was our personal reason for doing the podcast, to re-examine everything 30 plus years later.
Right.
Hold it at arm's length and try to understand and come to terms with things like our motives, our mistakes, our responsibility, our possible culpability, and to draw some kind of conclusion to reconcile the guilt we felt and still feel.
About Mr. Lee's death, yeah. So, I mean, you can do that, say, when you're watching a movie, right? But can you treat yourself as a character in a fiction and have that same kind of objectivity? Watch and rewatch the same movie and then come to some kind of aha moment, right? One of the problems with that is that you have not only a conscious self, but an unconscious self to contend with, both at the time, contemporaneously, but also right now, right? Like, what is it that we're after right now? So in some ways, the answer is stupidly simple, that I think probably you've figured out at this point too, right? It's like most literary or filmic characters, what they're looking for is absolution, right? Absolution in the death of Mr. Lee.
Yeah, okay, the last two episodes we spoke about our trip out west. The goal of the trip was to research Wovoka and the ghost dance, but we also hoped we could gift the tipi memorial to the Lakota tribe at Pine Ridge. And thinking that that would help us exit the hill. But we say this 30 years later. I'm not sure we were consciously trying to exit the hill back then. We were hoping to gift the tipi to the Lakota, yes. That was conscious, but if they had accepted it, would we have just walked away from the hill?
Yeah, that's the question, right? Now, later.
Yeah.
Because after Mr. Lee died, we took down the original teepee and then built and painted a fresh teepee out of canvas that we painted with all of the symbols that we associated with Mr. Lee, and we put it up as a memorial to Mr. Lee. So we didn't even walk away from the hill after Mr. Lee died. And what does that say, right?
Well,
yeah, and so yes, also another memorial, right?
Right. The memorial changed. Yeah.
We made another memorial, this time to Mr. Lee, and put that up. And so we've been thinking a lot, obviously, about memorials in the last couple of episodes. Why? Is what another thing we're thinking about. It's nothing that we outlined initially as being part of this podcast. So what's the deal with memorials?
Well, we
right?
just answered it in one way,
Yeah.
because the whole thing ended up as a memorial to Mr. Lee. But and memorials are memories. Memories are memorials. Some memories, whether they're public memorials like war memorials or private gravestones, are tied up into the trauma they recall.
Right.
They're a kind of before and after marker in one's life journey, a place where you continually revisit,
Relive.
Yeah,
Right.
both consciously and unconsciously. In my case, this is especially true with Mr. Lee, or our case. I mean, I've been collecting turtle figurines now for all these years.
Yeah, we have hundreds of them.
Right, kind of talismans in honor of Mr. Lee.
Right, which are more memorials, right? More before and after markers. Every time we buy one or pick up one or something, right? And so, I feel the need at this point to kind of step back a little bit and touch base with the intentions at the very beginning of putting up this teepee in the shantytown. Because people, by which I mean like officials, people from the Coalition for the Homeless in particular, who have a very narrow focus, borough president's office, they were constantly asking us, what are you trying to do? What's your goal here?
Yeah, and our answer was always, I think, the same. We don't have a goal. Or as we say to ourselves, put a stick inside the anthill and watch the ants scurry. And
as we say at the beginning of every single episode, right?
I mean, you have a shantytown that has existed for 5 years that we knew of. We drove past it every day.
Yeah.
And so let's put up a teepee inside it and see what happens. That's it. That was the goal. That's what artists do. Artists are not social workers or politicians or whatever else is dealing with that.
Yeah. So that was the answer to them in any case.
Right.
We put up a memorial, just like we said, right? But we called our work the living museum of the nomad monad, meaning as the circumstances changed, so did our goals. Remember, we didn't think this teepee would stay up in the first place. So as circumstances kept changing, just like, any creative act, everything keeps changing. Your goals, your intentions keep changing. We kept having to invent new ones as circumstances changed. So first and foremost, of course, was a memorial. We erected the teepee in the shantytown and dedicated it on the centenary of the Wounded Knee Massacre in remembrance of the lives lost in 1890 and in recognition of the sovereignty and dignity of the most disenfranchised and forgotten members of our society 100 years later.
Right.
That was it.
Right. So 1 year in, on the 101st anniversary of Wounded Knee, we took a road trip that was concentrating on the remembrance of the lives lost in 1890. After our visit to Pine Ridge, we came back concentrated on the second part of that.
Right.
The residents on the hill,
yes.
right?
Who have now become like family.
Right. And taking care of the church, the teepee, the church in their minds that we had put up.
And that meant a great deal to them.
Gave them a lot of,
purpose, right?
Well, I guess. What's a church give you?
I don't know. But it meant a lot to them at that point, which is why they took such good care of it, right?
Right.
So regarding our gift of the teepee to the Lakota, our intent still feels pure to this day. And we're even today still seeking the approval from the victims of the massacre, the dead of the Lakota.
Right.
Right?
And maybe that says everything about the TP project on the Hill. Our intent still feel pure in our minds to this day.
Yeah.
And we are, even today, still seeking approval or absolution from Mr. Lee, right?
Yeah, which we're never going to get until
we
meet again.
From Wounded Knee or Mr. Lee until,
So anyway, to continue with our story. For one thing, we wish, this is pre-internet, okay, but we wish we would have made better plans before heading out west to Wounded Knee. Put more effort into finding Lakota elders, for example, right, to offer the teepee to. We accepted Leola as the authority. And one of the reasons we did is because John and Annie had directed us to her, because when they got there first, a couple weeks earlier, they were told that Leola was the expert. So they
Right.
met Leola, and then they sent us to Leola, right?
Well, we had also written, the Lakota Times. This is pre-internet and everything, so we wrote the newspaper.
We did, but we never got a response.
Right.
And we let it go at that.
Yeah, but for instance, we could have taken the opportunity, or we should have, to get closer to Percy.
Yes.
We might have found someone who would have supported our memorial, and then the rest of our story would have changed. But at the time, we didn't get to know Percy very well. Just a few short conversations, and they were always with Leola present, and Percy mostly deferred to
Percy is
Leola.
Leola's partner.
Right.
Yeah.
And, he deferred to Leola.
Yes, exactly. And, we had told you last episode how Percy, when we met him, he came riding up on horseback, looking like like a native cowboy, like he rode out of some kind of Western, saying how he was coming back from hunting slow elk, quote unquote, right? Cows that he got from
a neighboring reservation, right?
No, not reservation, government property.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So, well, anyway, we have since Googled him further, see what we could find out. And amazingly, and this is just a few days ago, we actually discovered that he was, in fact, writing out of a Western at the time. The very Western that premiered on Thanksgiving when we erected the teepee a year earlier, which is Percy was an actor in Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves.
Yeah, he was amazing.
Who knew?
Well, I wish we would have known then. I mean, he was in the scene where Kevin Costner's character, the lieutenant, was in the process of sort of being accepted into the tribe. He had lost his army hat on the field out in a buffalo hunt, and one of the Lakota warriors from the tribe picked it up, and he wanted to keep it. And Kevin Costner wanted it back, but that warrior who wanted to keep it, warrior was
his character name, yeah.
Right, was Percy Whitebloom.
Yes, who spoke Lakota throughout the entire film, which is revolutionary at the time.
At that time, right. And I mean, had we known it at the time, we might have had a way in of talking to him about the memorial that we had built, and considering how enthusiastic he had been about the
Crazy Horse Memorial.
Yeah,
unlike Leola.
Yeah, in direct opposition to Leola.
Exactly.
He may have found some value in our intent, or
So more than that, Percy is also the founder and director of the Horse Spirit Society, which invites and encourages anyone to join them on the Chief Bigfoot Memorial Ride. If you recall from the last episode, that's the ride that we passed in Pine Ridge, where people recreate the journey that Chief Bigfoot took the day of the massacre before he died. As one of those organizers, Percy was we probably passed Percy.
Well, yeah, Percy was, of course, a part of that, right.
Because that all started in 1986.
And he was one of the original writers.
Exactly.
Right.
So with all of that,
right,
we would have been better off with Percy.
Yeah, I mean, even with the brief meeting with Percy, we felt that he was a more introspective and kind of on a spiritual journey. Yeah, right.
Journey, yeah.
More than Leola was, but we might have stood a better chance with him. But again, it just shows how badly we were trying to seek some kind of gesture of approval or something.
We just really wanted it badly and didn't get it, right? But so under the circumstances, when we returned to the teepee, to the shantytown after the road trip, the teepee had been really well taken care of. So, gift rejected, teepee beloved, now what?
Well, yeah, we decided, just keep on making art and see what happens. I mean, that's all we knew, that's all we had to do, right? And we started planning another theater piece. I mean, we were making the film, and we started making another theater piece on Janae's Prisoner of Love, based on that. which was a guiding text from the start, before we even put up the tipi.
Exactly. In explaining the title of his book, Janae said, "Gradually my feelings changed. I was still charmed, but I was not convinced. I was attracted, but not blinded. I behaved like a prisoner of love." And that was a perfect description of our relationship to the hill at that point, which is why it seemed like a good idea to do a theater project based on Prisoner of Love now, right?
Right.
And as I said from the beginning, what comes to mind when I think about the hill, first and foremost, is not sadness and not violence and not any of that, but all of the belly laughs these people gave me and all of the lessons they taught me, the lessons in perseverance without whining, you know, in radical self-acceptance, in Zen-like presence, act in the here and now. Don't worry about the past. Don't worry about the future. And the entitlement behind thinking that your life should have some kind of overarching mission, some kind of grand purpose, right?
When we got back to the hill from our trip on New Year's Day, we went directly to the hill. We didn't even stop at the Brooklyn apartment. And pretty much everyone was there.
Yeah.
And we got a real warm welcome home. And everybody was proud to have taken care of the tipi.
Louis greeted us with a hug, said, "I'm still drinking." Yes, you are, sweet Louis. Yes, you are.
And they all loved their medicine bead necklaces that we gave them.
Yes, they wore them.
They wore them for weeks after that. Until one of the cops stopped up there one day, and he said to me, "What's with all these necklaces? Are you guys some kind of cult now or something?"
Sure, why not? We'll take it, right? So anyway, the next day you returned the rental car because I was too chicken, I think, to come with you, and with a cracked windshield and 9,000 extra miles on it in 3 weeks.
Right, and then in the coming weeks we started making sandbags out of the mail bags, filling them with sand, creating like bunkers from a war or something, right?
In preparation for Prisoner of Love.
Right. And, because Prisoner of Love takes place largely among the refugees, the Palestinians in the Gaza and West Bank. And Janae is telling of his life living with the PLO.
Yeah. So it was funny, when we started the project, Prisoner of Love wasn't published in the U.S. We heard the inside story on that from someone we knew at Grove Press, and who was considering publishing it, but it was even too controversial for them at the time. And this is the foremost alternative press, renowned for their censorship and obscenity battles in the courts.
Right. So what we did was we bought 50 copies from a London publisher and had them shipped to us here in the States. And ironically, while we were now planning the theater piece on the book, based on the book, it was published in the U.S. A publisher in the U.S. put it up. So it watered down the values of the copies? No, not really. I mean, because all we wanted to do was kind of distribute them and have people read it in America. We didn't really have any other plan for them. But now we had a plan, sort of.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. Right. So, all right. With the new crack cocaine epidemic that was going on at the time, right, also came a new vocation on the hill. The heroin addicts were primarily thieves, but the crack addicts were mostly scammers. A victimless crime in so many ways, because scams depend on the greedy marks falling for the scam.
Yeah,
right?
And so what they did was they made fake camcorder boxes and sell them on Canal Street as though they were stolen, but they were fake. They take cardboard boxes, make them into a shape of a camcorder, and then they would take like advertising pieces of stuff for camcorder and put it on the outside of the box, and then put a piece of plastic over it like it was shrink wrapped, so it looked like it was stolen right from the store.
Yeah.
And they'd sell them at night so people wouldn't look at them that closely or could tell that they were fake. And people thought they were buying real stolen property.
And getting a great deal. Right.
Yeah.
So in the journal, I wrote this. Oh yeah, the little demon girl Kia and her boyfriend Vaughn. She's about 5 feet tall. He's maybe 5'10", with trademark matching jogging suits and sneakers and lightning in their eyes. They're always on the move. They're young, optimistic, eager capitalists. If they had been raised another way, they might be young Republicans, forming a business venture, with one specializing in manufacture and the other in sales. Wunderkinder, taking Wall Street by storm. Instead, they'll probably end up dead or in prison, but the pride and achievement is the same, however. Mm-hmm. So anyway, one day, I paid them $20 to show me how they made their boxes. And then we made our own. But instead of filling them with wet newspaper, we filled them with copies of Prisoner of Love, with a handmade bookmark telling people how to get their money back if they were not completely satisfied with their purchase of it.
Okay, yeah, so this became another art project. We had these boxes. I want to say I sold them on the street, but sometimes I get sort of caught up in the legend of myself. I have said that I did, and maybe I did, I don't know, but I think not. It's a little too brave of a performance art for even me, I guess, but maybe I did, I don't know. My memory of...
Let's say you did. What now?
But it's just that my memory of what I did and didn't do that time is very cloudy. Yeah. It's mixed up as it is in all kind of traumas and confrontations and violence. Things that happen and didn't happen alternate in my head.
Dreams about what happened.
Yeah, and the real dramatic and traumatic ones, a lot of them I didn't even tell you about.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
For instance, many times I put on the ghost shirt and dance at Tortuga Park before going up to the hill. This is later on now, and they were in essence kind of war dances for me, because there was a constant war going on in my mind. I'm using the word war a little loosely here. I've never been in actual combat when I was in the Army or anywhere else, but and although as a teenager I was in a lot of fights, as an adult there weren't very many.
No, you were in a psychological and physical war in the sense that it was very scary and you were scared to death.
Yeah, but now, on the hill now, physical violence was a constant threat.
Yes.
And almost daily occurrence. And, I grew up in the streets of Lockport, which is not, and I was on the street, I was a street person there, but it's not much different than the people growing up in these bad neighborhoods.
No, it is much different.
Yeah.
You said it's not much different.
No, it's much different. No, I didn't say, it's much different.
Just wanted to clarify what you meant.
Yeah. I mean, I was a novice in this environment, but I was always pretending to be something more. But I also did begin to change. The ghost shirt and the ritual that I did at Tortuga Park gave me the courage to be something more. I sort of became the crazy fuck white boy living in a teepee.
Yeah.
And it was a kind of pretend crazy until
it became real crazy.
Yeah. So...
Oh, boy.
So before there was an art project on the fake camcorder boxes, I was at war with those who were sitting outside the hill, out in the open, making them right in front of the teepee. And I'd walk out of the teepee and say to them, go in somebody's hut. You can't do this out here. And they'd say back to me, who says? And I'd say, me. And then I sometimes... Sometimes I do the squirrel, and then walk back into the teepee, and with Big Squirrel I'd walk back into the teepee, and so variations of this scene happened all the time.
Right, yeah.
So they probably thought I was crazy, and they half-assed listened to me. And, Spencer in Panama supposedly didn't want him out there either. So, but then somewhere in this war with the box people, right, there was a peace treaty or something, and the boxes now became part of our art.
Art
right?
project, yes. For instance, we put them in a prominent gallery, downtown alternative gallery at the time, Exit Art, that had a store that they called the Apartment Store. And we also exhibited them at Brecht Forum, which was really funny.
Yeah.
Marxist Brecht Forum. And they put one in their lobby on a pedestal as an art object.
Yeah, but I think it was only up there for a day or two, and then some Marxist or socialist attending the various lectures there stole it. Yeah.
Right. So they stole something valuable, right? A camcorder, not a piece of art, which has no value, right? Stupid Marxists. But we always imagining them opening the box, right? And finding a copy of Prisoner of Love in it versus a camcorder. Of course, they had their bookmark, but no, they did not write us to say they were not happy with their theft. Anyway, so life went on on the hill, right? It just went on in all its absurd, heartwarming, frightening, sign-filled way. It just went on.
Yeah, signs. Right? Yeah, everywhere signs. Significant, metaphysical markers. Right?
Yes.
I mean, Tortuga Pond had frozen over while we were gone. The city as they periodically did, had cut off the electric.
Yeah.
So the air pump and heater that I had installed inside the pond were turned off, and it froze over. But lo and behold, in March, Tortuga stuck his head up out of the ice, right? He had hibernated for the winter and was alive. He survived. It seemed like a miracle, a miracle that everyone took as a metaphor for their own lives. And, they were lifted up by it. Mr. Lee and I talked about it for weeks. I mean, talked about it the way we talked to each other, which was some rudimentary Spanish on my part, and but mostly just broad gestures, celebrating and, like miming the incredible life and times of Tortuga
del Sol, Tortuga de Luna.
Right.
Yeah, but everybody was just elated, because they all took it as this, we're going to survive sign, right? And Tortuga actually went back into hibernation, but came out later. As I said, Tortuga has a good ending. Thank you. So more from the heartwarming department before we get to some of the other departments, right? And there's so many examples of those. Collectively, it's what allowed us to continue living on the hill. The old family that we had a lot of them had died or moved on, but then there were all of the remnants there, of the original people, amongst whom hope sprang eternal. And this Tortuga thing was a classic example, right? But for instance, Brother Billy, right, of the four Jersey brothers, the James gang, he stopped by. They let him out of jail on the condition that he would go into a drug program. He did, but then he quit because he said they made him sit there like an 8-year-old with knees together and hands on his knees. But then he said he claimed that if he got a job, he wouldn't have to go back to jail. Don't know, right? So anyway, that's what he planned on doing. He wanted to stay clean because he was so crazy about his kids, right? High hopes. Then same with Sue and Woodsman Tony. They went into detox together. The ACT UP needle exchange people would come up to the hill every Saturday, and they allowed people to trade in 3 needles for 1 clean one and bleach and cotton, right? So anyway, Sue and Tony told them they wanted to enter a program, and the guy there says, "Is today too soon?" And Sue was elated. No, yeah, that's great, let's go. So they, we gave them our phone number and they left some stuff with us for safekeeping, belongings. Well, that didn't work out. Bunch of bureaucratic hurdles. And the next day, they were so determined they actually went to the hospital. And at the hospital, they were giving yet more reasons why they needed to go back out on the street. So they came back to the hill. But the high hopes, right? The high hopes that everybody had, that you wanted to support.
Right. Yeah, and the dance with the city and the electric, it just continued, right? Every time the city tore out the electric, there were fires on the hill.
Yeah.
From heating the barrels, right? That they brought into the huts. And this time, to restore the electric, me and Sammy and Ivan, we went down to the pole again. And what we did was we cemented the line underground, in the crack of the sidewalk, so you couldn't see it.
Right.
And John got it all on film because we were doing film at that time. I wanted Tortuga to have an aerated pound.
Yeah, pond. Right,
so
exactly.
the water keep moving.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, because now that especially still
So,
alive, right?
So hopes again.
Hopes, right.
Right.
So, and Spencer and Robin, drug dealers, right? They continued to pledge their support. And they did support it by getting everybody to cooperate. Producers financing the talent, I guess you could say, right? Well, just about everyone on the hill worked for them already anyway, right? So every time somebody swept the yard or built a new hut or took out some garbage, they got paid by Spencer. Of course, we knew this was dirty money, right? Drug money. But going around them would have been impossible anyway, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So in making the film, we began to realize that the most prominent or significant theme or symbolic element should be fire.
Yeah.
And that's what we should edit everything around. Nomads' homes next to fire, Prometheus stealing fire. This was all part of the...
play we did.
Right, there was an element of the play.
Molten gold.
Right. And so, of course, we never realized how prescient and this observation was about what would happen in real life.
Yeah.
I mean, foreshadowing the death of Mr. Lee.
Right, okay. So before that, more from the heartwarming department.
Oh.
Weeks later, I watched Red and Ivan work together on the fuse box because there were some wiring problems. And it was like the most important thing, as though they didn't have any other problems, right? Most important thing in the world to them. What I wrote in the journal will further explain our prisoner of love mindset. I said, I know I keep saying this, but I have such affection for these people and I can't quite put my finger on why. They just keep admirably plugging along, like everybody else, except the deck is completely stacked against them. But the struggle is so basic that all the layers of pretense, all the neuroses, all the attempts at mindfuck and control over others just fall away. Like Zen, the focus falls on doing one thing at a time, here and now. And since there is, in most of these people's cases, I'm saying this now, there is no big picture. They were all dying of AIDS, right? It's possible to live side by side without judgment, with humility, with tolerance. And it's not pity I feel, except maybe pity for the quiet desperation of humanity in general. On the contrary, I laugh so hard and so often at the comedy of the situations on the hill. For example, right? One evening the cops came around because someone, a robber, ran through the hill trying to escape the cops. So now they noticed that everybody had electric again, right? They started searching the huts, starting with Tony's, Woodsman Tony. And when Ivan realized that they were around, he quickly turned off the breaker just before they almost found a gun under his bed. At that point, The whole unaware hill came out of their huts yelling, "Hey, yo, what's up? Hey, Ivan, what's with the electric?"
Right.
It was like a combination, like Beggar's Opera and Comedy of Errors up there most of the time.
Right.
It was hilarious, you know?
Yeah. After that, the city ripped out the electric again, and but they had to use a special electricity detector. It looked like like
Because
one
you
of
guys
those,
had buried the lines,
Right.
unlike the rest of the United States.
right. So they were they were going along the sidewalk with this detector. It looked like one of those metal detectors or something. They were going, and of course they found it, right? And they found the wire and took it out. And then right after that, that's when Spencer bought a generator, and he was selective on who he hooked up to the generator, and like forcing Sammy to, I don't know if he had to pay or do something, but Sammy, who used to lord over the electricity, right?
Yeah.
And right after the generator started cooking, right, a cop came up, and he came up to me, right, and he said, "You got a receipt for that generator?" I said, "Why? Has there one been stolen or something?" and I said, "Yeah, I got it, but
You're not going to get it.
No, right. So anyway,
It's a free country.
Right. Meanwhile, we had made the teepee very comfortable. We put in a fold-out couch, right? And we had a television inside. Looking back now, we kind of shake our heads because electric and a teepee.
A television in a teepee.
Yeah.
We were lost.
Yeah, but we weren't spending most nights there. I mean, we were at the apartment, right? And the hill was now strictly an art project, the backdrop of another planned theater piece. And the set of a planned film, right?
Which brings us to the absurd department, right? Red was still around, but he had fallen while climbing up to steal the surveillance cameras from the ATM vestibules, which was his MO these days, right? And he broke both his arm and his leg. So he was wheelchair bound, and he was hobbling around until we remembered we had a wheelchair still from our production of Fassbinder's Trash to City and Death, which we talked about in episode 4. But now Ivan, who was his roommate, he was pushing him around everywhere to take care of his business. It was really pretty funny, And, Dip was locked into his hut by Panama, locked in. He was supposed to sell drugs from a little window, and he could only get out if Shaft, which was one of Panama's men, let him out.
Yeah, a very crazy and dangerous place to allow yourself to be put in with all the fires that were going on, right?
Right. And now Ivan was selling out of Coco's hut while she was in the hospital, right? Red, in fact, was telling me that he was doing at that point both methadone and dope, which is why Ivan fervently hoped that the hill would finally come down. It was the motivation he needed to get clean, right? But instead...
He's... right. He took off with, it was said $1,400.
Yeah.
Right. So now Spencer had his hut. Because Ivan was gone.
The Thoreau hut, which we kept telling Spencer, no, you can't have the Thoreau.
Well, I don't know how we were telling him that, but I mean, now he was essentially a co-producer of the film with us, right? And in a way, we were co-producing The Hill at this point. I mean, it was, and everything that was going on. At one point, we even gathered in John's apartment, and we were looking at the film footage.
Yes.
And Spencer was particularly interested in the footage I shot with the Super 8 out of a peephole inside the teepee, where I was catching one of the cops being paid off by Tony Panama, right? Yeah. And so when we were looking at the footage, he saw it, and it wasn't quite enough to show it, and so he was mad about that. But then another kind of absurdity, I guess, but I mean, it was just what was happening. He invited us. Now, this is just five months after we got back, right?
Yeah.
He invited us to his house where Robin was having a baby shower.
Yeah, she was 7 months pregnant meanwhile.
Yeah, and it was in East New York, one of the most dangerous neighborhoods in New York City at that time. Yeah. And we went, and we were in the car, and we stopped and asked somebody for directions.
And they told us, you shouldn't be here.
No, right.
They kept telling us, get out of this neighborhood, whitey, essentially.
Yeah, and we were also the only white people at the shower, but I mean, we were made comfortable and everything, being there, like we belonged. And from the Hill, Shaft was there. Mm-hmm. But not Tony Panama, which was conspicuous, but maybe not. I mean, there's distinctions between Shaft, who seemed to be a general, and Tony Panama, who seemed to be a lieutenant, you know. And I think
Red did tell me at one point, though, that it wasn't that Shaft was above Tony Panama, and that, you know, that at the time we thought. All right. Well, anyway, I talked to Shaft there for a while about his pneumonia, and Coco's both had tumors. Coco's was close to the heart. Both almost died, he said. And then little demon Livewire Kia and Vaughn were there with, you know, a fake camcorder fame. And meanwhile, I had drawn Spencer and Robin onto mailbags, which they really, really wanted and pressed me on. This was so important to them. So they, at this shower, gave me a wool and silk scarf as a thank you, and anyway, we danced all night and we had a lot of fun. Beyond absurd, right? You know, you want to know why we feel, well, whatever. Which brings us to the frightening category, right? All the violence all around us that kept escalating.
Yeah, the Canal Street, there was a jewelry store on Canal Street that was robbed, and the owner shot the perp 3 times dead. Right. And the people on the hill said that it was one of the people who hung out up on the hill. And, you know, there were so many unknown, scary, dangerous looking people that were hanging out now. And all of them were would-be perps, it looked like.
Yes, and people were getting held up at gunpoint. You know, we had told one story in a previous episode where Coco was, but there were more incidents of that. And Juan, poor Juan, kept getting beaten up. I guess, you know, he was a man-child and an easy target for people's rage. And one time he had to get his upper jaw wired after a fight broke out, and somebody hit him in the face with a chair. And then Bobby, who we haven't talked about that much, but he was up there now, and
we'll talk about him. Yeah, we'll talk about Bobby. Go ahead.
But he hit Juan in his wired jaw, so now Juan needed another operation, right? And but in the middle of all that, Juan managed to give me another belly laugh. He made a big handmade sign on cardboard that he hung out over the wall facing Canal Street, and it said, "Please send help." You know, it's like.
But still, you know, the scariest part was the cops, I think. They came around regularly now, and they were all on the take. It seemed like all of them, not all of them, but majority of them were on the take. Besides shooting through the peephole that time of that transaction, right? I also bought a micro recorder. And
that fit into a cigarette pack.
Right. I was in hopes of catching them and, you know, talking belligerently or saying something corrupt, which they were always saying.
Always.
I mean, once I wasn't close enough to record, but one time I heard a cop say to one of the women that were hanging there, so I hear you like to suck black dick, or do you like it in the ass? You know,
New York's finest. Right?
Well, yeah. So whose side are you on? You know, the cops or the drug lord? Well, neither. Both. An extremely stupid situation where you have.
Yeah, and then one day a cop came up and beat the shit out of Tony Panama, but was about to. I mean, you know, but in the last second, he saw 2 women photographers. they hung out a lot, and we let them take photographs because they weren't hit and run photographers. While we were gone, they also kept an eye on the tipi. They were one of the people who occasionally left messages, But so the cops at the last second saw that those two women were up there and didn't, right? And asked them, well, what are you doing up here? And they said, oh, we're just students. So the cops turned to Tony and said, you're lucky today, right? And then another time, they smashed Tony Panama's hut up with sledgehammer, stereo and all, and then told another minor player up there whose name was also Tony, that Tony was snitching on Panama, the cops told him. So the two Tonys got into a fight, and both of them threatened that this isn't over, right?
Yeah, that other Tony, this supposed snitch, was a scary guy. He was about 6 feet tall, and
he was super scary. He was a psychopath, man.
Yeah, and he had a jailhouse build, bulging muscles. He was constantly threatening me, but I had developed another kind of crazy fuck pose. Anyway, every morning, the Chinese communities, part of them, gathered in the park across the street from the hill, and they would do Tai Chi exercise in the morning. It would happen every morning around 8 o'clock. Mm-hmm. I learned later that it wasn't Tai Chi. It was probably, the forms they were practicing was probably Qigong or
Qigong.
Qigong,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And it always ended with the posture of hugging the tree, where you just stand and hug the tree and breathe. And, when you're in a threatening situation, your body does something automatically, instinctually, and it's called the fight or flight syndrome.
Or freeze.
Fight, flight, or freeze.
Right.
And freeze is when you don't know which one you're going to do.
Exactly.
Right. So I guess naturally my body would freeze when Tony confronted me, but somewhat controlledly, I would go from the freeze into hugging the tree and start breathing. And he said to me, what are you? Are you some kind of kung fu or something like that? So he was thinking all the time that, probably he could fight in closed little tiny cell with his bulk, but he was probably afraid because, Tony Panama kicked his ass one time. Just, he wasn't as big or bulky as him. But what he didn't know was that if he attacked me, all I had was a squirrel chuckle, and I'd be totally defenseless,
So one Saturday, another thing that happened is 5 or 6 off-duty cops came up to the hill with brand new NYPD issue sledgehammers. This was later written about in an article as well. And they destroyed one of the huts. Supposedly, one of the cops, Nunez was his name, had his tires slashed. And he said they'd keep taking huts down every time something happened. After that, the precinct commander in a suit and tie came up to say, we have to work together, quote unquote, on this problem. And he got caught off guard when he was pressed. And then he said, oh, those 5 or 6 guys, they were with the NYPD issue sledgehammers. Oh, those were firemen, not police, which is really funny stuff if you think about it, right? That's the best he could come up with.
Yeah, so we started making phone calls, a lot of them,
which
right?
Part of this came out of, too. So,
right.
Because we were saying, we can't keep doing this shit.
And we were trying to tell everyone we called what was going on, and, without making us a potential target, right? We told them that they can and should make arrests, that every idiot knows who's selling, who's supplying, who's buying, who's using, that they'd be doing everyone a big favor if they just cleaned house. But what they shouldn't keep doing is harassing and terrorizing people at random.
Right. So weeks of nearly daily calls by us, right? Of passing the buck by them. Oh, let me check into it further. continued until one day a big meeting took place on the hill that involved all of these people, right? Everybody stood in a big circle in front of the geomancer's hut, right? The guy who built his hut into the hill. A woman named Deborah Chang. She was the community relations specialist for the mayor's office on homelessness. A police sergeant from the 5th Precinct. Representatives from HRA, Human Resources Administration, and yes, Shaft, so a representative from Panama, right? And Nick was there, and he recorded it all with his little micro recorder in your cigarette pack, right?
Right. And when it was my turn to speak, I got everything out of my system, right, in front of everybody. The cops' aggressiveness, the cleanup effort and needing more dumpsters. The promise, our promise to build birdier huts. And the tours of church groups every Friday evening, tours of high school kids and grade school kids even, right?
Yes, they were regulars now.
Yeah. And then, of course, the fires that occur when the electric is turned off. And the cops coming in and taking whatever they want for themselves.
Yeah.
And then the drug dealers and the dilemma on what to do when they are honorable and treat you with respect, unlike the cops.
Yes, and he said all this. What are you supposed to do?
And remember, when I said that, Shaft was standing there. Right. I mean, the drug dealers general, right?
Yeah.
And listening to everything we said, right?
Right. And right on cue, when you said the cops come and just take whatever they want, when they want it, for themselves, this cop named Ward came riding up on his stupid scooter, idiot Ward, right? And said in front of everybody, "Hey, what are you doing with my wheelbarrow?" We just looked at everybody in that circle, and they just looked down, uncomfortable, eyes averted.
Right. And
you can't script this better.
Yeah. The thing is, everyone knew what was going on.
Yes.
The cops even mentioned Spencer by name.
Yes. Why didn't they do anything?
They just couldn't, I guess.
Well, we know why, right?
Why?
Because the police corruption scandal was going to be blown wide open.
Well, we never knew, and we still don't know what was going on. Look, cops, you got to feel, they were beating up Panama. They knew who was doing it. Why couldn't they arrest them? There must be a reason why they can't
because
arrest
it was
them.
their supply, their source of
then
money.
Then why are they beating him up? Some of the cops are beating him up and tearing down his hut.
To let them know who was boss.
I guess. I don't know. I think there was good and bad cops, and, the good cops, their hands were tied for whatever reason. I really don't know. But we ended that meeting feeling very confused, suspicious.
All right, so a week later, Spencer did a Memorial Day barbecue. I spent a lot of the time with the various kids that were there. Nick made them a basketball hoop and entertained them inside the teepee. We harvested a couple of the radishes that were by this point coming out of the garden that we had planted. In the course of the day, Sue played basketball for what seemed like hours. I don't know where she got this energy, but in between, she was going in to shoot up, right? Periodically. The women, meaning Robin and her sister-in-law and her friends, fixed the food. And the boys took care of the generator when there was at one point a problem with it and it turned off, right? And once again, a good old-fashioned cookout was held by all. The two lady photographers came. Andreas, our photographer friend, whose pictures are, on the cover of my book and this podcast. Our friend Cara came. Nothing monumental or eventful happened, except a barbecue in a shantytown with huts and a Lakota teepee hosted by a drug dealer with drug addicts and kids present. I mean, we're still in the absurd category now, right? At this point, I wrote in my journal, I've come to the conclusion that the hill will be there forever. All those rumors over the months and over the years of it being torn down, yeah, sure. I long for a great act, all caps, an inspired act, a crescendo followed by a resolution that will leave things palpably altered.
Yeah, right.
For better, in other words, for the better. In other words, I don't want to die, I wrote. Am I asking too much? Ha, end quote.
Right. Yeah, careful what you ask for, right? Yeah. A few days later, on May 29th, 1992, while we were sleeping comfortably in our Brooklyn apartment, the event that prompted us to bury the story in our basement for 30 years, the event we still dread talking about, the event that we want to attempt to reconcile and finally face head on, happened. A rival drug dealer set a fire on the hill and killed the most innocent one of us all. Mr. Lee burned to death in his hunt.
So, as I said before, 2 weeks later after that, the police corruption scandal starring Michael Dowd that we had talked about in an earlier episode broke. Big news day headline, Feds zero in on cops, right? This was years in the making. So this all coincided and all hell broke loose.
Right.
And in the next episode, we're going to dive into the fallout of all of this, okay? Again, feel free to write us on this or any topic, right? Podcast at thievestheater.org. We'd love to hear from you. Yeah, go ahead.
No, nothing. I mean, thank you for listening to The Hill by Thieves Theater. It feels funny giving all this after talking.
Yeah. Like, subscribe, all of that. All right. Thanks for listening, guys. See you next episode.
See.